So everybody, once again, I'll introduce myself. My name's Karen Rent, and I work two different places. Conveniently, I live in Keene, right between both of those places. So at the Harris Center for Conservation Education, I'm a teacher naturalist. And the Harris Center is located in Hancock, New Hampshire, so in the southwestern corner of the state in the Monadnock region, if you're not familiar. And the Harris Center is an organization that kind of has a threefold mission. So over the past 50 years, we've conserved about 24,000 acres of property in our super sanctuary. So one of our missions is to protect areas of land so that animals and plants have places to live and so that people have places to enjoy that open space. We also have a bunch of teacher naturalists, and that's what I get to do. So I am an educator, and I work in schools in the Monadnock region, so in the Kentucky Valley School District and in the Keene School District, and I collaborate with teachers to create standards-based lessons focused on nearby nature. And we work with 30 different schools so far, many kids. But it's not just school programs that we do. We also do preschool programs, community programs, and we work with some assisted living facilities. So it's kind of cool that we have what we call our lifespan education program. So we get to reach lots of different ages. So along with land protection and education, we also facilitate lots of conservation research and community citizen science programs. So we do the Salamander Crossing Brigade, and then we help coordinate the PAC Monadnock Raptor Observatory, which is a collaboration with New Hampshire Audubon. And it's really fun to head up there in the fall and watch our migrating hawks as they make their way down the Appalachian Mountains. It's pretty cool. So along with being a teacher naturalist at the Harris Center, I also work for Vermont Wilderness School. And Vermont Wilderness School is an organization that's based out of Brattleboro, Vermont. And I work for a weekly nature connection program called the Great Blue Heron Community School. And Vermont Wilderness School, throughout the entire pandemic, other than a short break last spring, so right when everyone kind of went into lockdown, they've continued to offer in-person programming throughout the entire pandemic. So at Vermont Wilderness School, I'm outside all day, every Wednesday with a group of kids exploring along the banks of the West River, which the Abenaki call Wantastuk, which means where something is lost. And I'm super grateful that my kids get to join me at that program. And I love the fact that I work these two very different types of programming. So I get to be outside all day with the same group of children every week at Vermont Wilderness School's Great Blue Heron School. And then at the Harris Center, I get to work with many different children and teachers in our public schools, helping them to get outside connected to nearby nature. So I like to think about the good old days. So back when we could have these big opening circles at camp and sing songs, or back when we used to crouch around the fire telling stories, or, you know, gathered around a pinned bee looking at the pollen baskets. So I think back to these days and think about all of the changes that we've had to do this year. So things look definitely a bit different. And I have to admit that at the start of the school year, I was definitely nervous about what things were going to be like. And I feel like despite the changes that we've had to go through, that the outdoor learning experiences that I've been able to be a part of have remained really meaningful, fun, and I think that they've played a huge role in helping children and classroom teachers and me get through a really rough year. And I really feel like our outdoor learning experiences actually probably felt like some of the most normal times of this year. So today, what I'm going to share with you are some of the things that I've learned this past year as an outdoor educator working through the pandemic. So I'll talk about some of the tips or tricks or things that we've been doing at both organizations to help keep participants safe and ourselves safe, and to keep our experiences meaningful and fun. So I'll sort of bounce back between things that I've done at both organizations. This is a squirrel experiment. We did a lot of squirrel lessons this year because we focused a lot on nearby nature since we were teaching both in the school and doing virtual learning. So in this picture, we were setting up a squirrel food preference experiment, which was really fun. So first of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the logistical things. So for drop-off programs like Great Blue Heron Community School and our spring adventure, March adventure camp that we did this year, we did screening questions for all participants. So at Great Blue Heron, we just ask parents when they drop their kids off, and we would do the temperature check right there. At the Harris Center, we created a Google form that we would send to the parents, and we would ask them to fill out the Google form each morning before they would drop their kids off. And that actually worked surprisingly well. We had a couple people forget, but we would just have paper copies for them to fill out when we were there. We have staggered drop-off and pickup times at Great Blue Heron because we have a bigger group. We have about 30 kids that get dropped off for that program. So each small group has kind of a 10-minute staggered drop-off and pickup time. So that actually helps with the congestion that always happened during those drop-off and pickup times. Overall, we have a smaller group size in both Great Blue Heron Community School and my summer camp at the Harris Center. Our ratio at Great Blue Heron used to be 8 or 9 kids to 2 adults, and it was similar at summer camp. But now we are down to 6 kids with 1 adult and maybe a volunteer at Great Blue Heron Community School. So we call them pods. And at the Harris Center camp, our ratio is a little different. We're doing 8 kids and then 1 lead and 1 assistant staff member. The one big change is that instead of, at both of those programs, we would always start out with a big group circle in the beginning and end, and we're not doing those this year. So by staying in just our pods throughout the day, if anyone did have COVID, we didn't have to worry about cross-pollinating or whatever you want to call it with the other pods. So we wouldn't have to all stay home if that happened. We're wearing masks outside and staying 6 feet apart. And that's something we're trying to do in both of those, for both of my organizations.
Karen, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah, definitely.
With the drop off and pickup, are the parents allowed, are they just staying in their vehicle and dropping the kids off, or do they come in?
At Great Blue Heron, they have a pull through. So parents are staying in their vehicle unless, if we need to talk to a parent, we would typically come to the vehicle. Sometimes they'll come out, but typically the parents just stay in the vehicle. At the Harris Center, our camp was smaller in spring, so parents could get out. In the summer, we're still trying to figure out what we're going to do. But yeah, typically, especially after the first day, parents were more okay with not having to get out and that kind of thing. Some of the shifts we made for our school programming is that we stuck to only outside teaching. Since each of us bounced to many different schools, we didn't want to go inside. So we were only teaching outside, which I think is great because that's what I prefer anyway, but it did certainly make it more difficult when it came to weather. We try to have equipment or materials for each student, or if not, we would wipe them down between classes so we could reuse them. If we were sharing, we'd use hand sanitizer. We used a lot we laminated a lot of things so that we could wipe them and reuse them. And typically we found that we actually just really planned our lessons we just used less stuff. And it actually was kind of refreshing to, think about how we can just use less materials in general. So it made things a lot easier. And finally, one of the big things that we did was each staff member got a voice amplifier. So there's just this little thing that I should get it. Actually, I could show it to you after. I can run and get it when Jim's talking, but I just wear it around my waist, and there's a little microphone, and it's not this loud amplification, but it just amplifies your voice enough so that with a mask, it's a lot easier for everyone to hear you when they're distanced. It made a huge difference, especially when teaching a lot.
Karen, there's a good question in the chat from Nicole.
Oh, yeah.
They're wondering how you were able to create a community this school year with parents staying in their cars.
That's a great question. That actually is probably one of the things that I felt like was a bit challenging. So at Great Blue Heron Community School, it used to be that parents could join us for our closing circle and our opening circle, and really anytime they wanted. And that's not something that could happen this year. So all of our communication pretty much has been via computer. So at the beginning of the year, we had a Zoom meeting so we could meet people that way. Each week I send an email with pictures and our story of the day, and, parents will interact with me that way. And I would call, if there's any issues, I would call and talk to parents. But I think that just because the community of Great Blue Heron is really tight-knit and it's been around for a while, and I knew a lot of the parents already, it actually didn't feel, it still felt like a community. It would have been harder, I think, if I didn't know some of the parents already. Yeah, that's a good question though. It's so tricky. So physical distancing is something that we really emphasized at both of my organizations. And I think that it was probably the thing that stressed me out the most at the beginning of the year, was how am I really gonna, get kids to stay apart all the time when I'm with them all day, especially at Great Blue Heron. So, one of the things, like, how can we help them understand even what 6 feet means when spatial awareness is something that, takes time to learn. So one of the things was just showing them. So especially during my school programs, I always bring these sit-upons, which mine are just really cheap sleeping pads that I got at EMS and just sliced into 4, and have those set up, before the children even get outside. And this is where having the voice amplifier really helped, because kids being so spread out, especially when there's other classes outside or kids at the playground. So showing them was really the first step, and using those sit-upons was kind of key. But then the other thing I really like to think about a lot, particularly with my weekly program at Great Blue Heron, is just thinking about activities that really promote spatial awareness. Because I really found, especially at first, I was constantly saying, like, okay, what's your distance? What's your distance? And, there were other ways of showing them, like, I'm 5 feet tall, so I would use myself as a point of reference, wingspan, that sort of thing. But one of the things that I think is really important is teaching them to understand their place in space. And I think that the ways to do that are by promoting physical activity. So jumping, building structures, climbing. So all of these things, these physical things, really help them understand their body and spacing. So it's something that I really promote all the time. And I actually do feel like I noticed them having a much better awareness, spatial awareness, as the year has gone on at Great Blue Heron. Things like this are easy at my outdoor wilderness program. So how does this, you know, translate when it comes to a school setting? So things like map making, like activities where kids are really noticing what's around them and where they are. Like, I think that's a really great thing to practice and helping them understand spatial awareness. And I think the more they understand spatial awareness, the easier it is for them to distance. Journaling and particularly sketching, I think is really important. And then also just still jumping and climbing and playing, which I think can happen in school as well as in the woods. I definitely feel like, you know, it's hard to keep children distanced at all times. So some of the things I like to do if I notice they are having a really hard time is trying to get children to kind of come back into their bodies. So oftentimes I will do that thing where you're like, if you can hear me, touch your nose. If you can hear me, touch your head, and like really like going through that and getting them to like become aware of their body again. And after I do that, then be like, okay, how far away are you? And just sort of like bringing them back into their bodies. I also often will be like, freeze, and have them freeze right where they are for a minute so that they can just once again become aware of their distance. I've never actually brought a measuring tape or anything out like that with me. I know some people that would bring a string that's 6 feet with them at all times just so they can use that as a reference. Typically what I do is like put my arms out as a reminder, like wingspan, and I would have the kids, our point of reference was often like, if you could both put your arms out and 1 or 2 people could stand between you, then you're like a good distance. So I was curious if anybody had other ideas or wanted to share any other ways that perhaps you have shared this idea or promoted this idea of physical distancing, because I think that people probably are a lot more creative than me when it comes to that. But... Oh, is everyone seeing this chat window now up in my... Any other ideas out there? Or shall I move on?
I was hoping that we'd be learning about nature lessons themselves, not about so much the tediousness of it. So I hope we're going in that direction.
Yeah, I was going to share just some of the other, I'm not sharing any like in-depth lesson plan ideas, but we could certainly take some time to talk together about it after mine and Jim's presentation, because we'll have time for that. So some other, some other games and activities that I think do work well. So maybe this will help answer some of those things. Journaling. And oftentimes when I journal with younger kids or have them sketch, I sometimes have them create these badges because it seems a little less daunting to them to draw like a little circle picture versus a full page worth. In the Harris Center, actually, Leanne, this could be a resource if you want to share. The Harris Center has a whole page dedicated to journal prompts. We do lots of hiding activities. So in both of our nature-focused programs at the Harris Center and at Great Blue Heron, we play lots of games like camouflage, a big sort of Marco Polo hiding game. So hiding games are really great ways to be physically distanced. And, you know, you could turn so many ecology focused things into hiding and sneaking games. Also lots of circle games, because in a circle, you know, you can take your mask off if you're in one place. So I find those to be really helpful. One other big question that I had was, how do you play tag when you need to be physically distanced? Because we do have so many animal ecology focused games that are tag related. So some of the things that we've done are throwing pine cones instead of tagging. When there was snow, we would throw snow, acorns, and then like a flexible beech branch actually works really well to tag with because it's flimsy enough that it doesn't hurt and you can still tag from a distance. I was kind of skeptical of that one because I have some really impulsive kids in my Wednesday group, but it actually worked out fine. I was curious if anyone had any other ideas for tag, because that was like summer camp especially is coming up and tag is like a big thing, but so I'd be interested in hearing other ideas about that. A sponge tag, that's fun. That's a good idea. We were also thinking squirting, like squirt guns could be a good alternative to tagging in the summer. So yeah, overall, I think that whether it is during a Harris Center lesson at a school or at Great Blue Heron, I think that generally the children that I have been working with were just so happy to be out exploring and learning outdoors and together with other children, that whether they were distanced or masked, I just think that everyone was really grateful and having a meaningful, fun time, despite the distance and despite the masks. And my hope is that the future of learning actually looks a lot less like this, which a lot of it has looked like this past year. And then looks a little more like this. So I think that, we can actually learn a lot from these outdoor experiences that a lot of us are having. And that's my email address there. If anyone has questions, especially, if there are particularly, I wasn't sure who was asking about specific lessons, but if there's something in particular, if you want to send me an email, I could probably help you find ideas for particular activities. I'm going to pass it on to Jim now and stop sharing my screen. And I will grab that amplifier so I could, when Jim's doing that, I can share that at the end. I don't know the brand, but.
All right, well, we'll shift gears a little bit here. I'm going to share my screen. I focus a little bit on kind of the emotional benefits that are already been studied and are evident within outdoor education, environmental education, but also how those are going to really be kind of thought about again as we carry forward. My kind of process on this is that I think where everyone's at, hopefully, double fingers crossed that we're over a lot of the worst aspects of this, but how are we working forward with some of the things that we've learned? So Karen's had a lot of those experiences as far as that, but also how do we kind of come back to normal and cater to all the different emotional processes that our participants are going to be going through, and how outdoor education specifically really already kind of lends itself to that in a lot of aspects. Before that, a little bit, I wanted to share just a little bit about my organization currently, which is Remick Country Doctor Museum and Farm in Tamworth. And I just wanted to show a little quick snippets of some video just to get an area of the property. This is from a video I did over the summer on YouTube. But we are just a little bit of our property. It's a historic farm. It's been it was in the Remick family for since about the late 1790s, and has been in agriculture ever since. Not to belabor anything, going into it became a museum because the last landowners there didn't have any heirs to pass it along to, and they wanted it to continue to be in agriculture. So we now have about 200 acres of farm and forest space that we not only run as a current farm still, where we produce food for the local community, but also we offer all kinds of different education opportunities. So I did a lot of YouTube over the last spring and summer and fall and continuing, as we haven't been able to have as many people. But also I did open up our facilities during last summer. We had basically everything was open for free, and we just allowed people to come onto our outdoor areas of property so that they could kind of be around and feel safe, but have plenty of space and not have to kind of be there. And that's Pippa, one of our newest cows from last year. But I'll stop the cuteness behind me and shift back to where we are. The more organized program that we did have were homeschooling, and it wasn't necessarily homeschooling pods. It's kind of how it was framed, but really just small pod learning. And I opened up that to groups of 12 or less, and those groups had to be formed themselves as opposed to kind of coming together with the group. I just wanted to be able to have the participants themselves monitor their own safety, be comfortable with their participants, and then I would be, managing the safety from our end, so that we only had really two points of contact, really, myself and their group. And so that worked out very well. And that was family groups. So family groups, or then small schools, right? If you had a small enough classroom that they could do some things like that, or local preschools, those groups would come as well, or homeschool families. And so it would be me and their group. And that was a really successful time. So transitioning from what I did, talking a little bit about kind of the emotional benefits of outdoor education. Don't worry, I'm not going to go into all these ridiculous citations, but thinking back, when I started really into the professional side of environmental education, research was always a big thing. Wanting to know, especially from school administrators, trying to convince people to get to your facility, how is this going to impact our grades, right? Is this going to show improvement in standardized test scores? Are students going to be doing better in science or other academic areas? And a lot of things have been shown in that, but also during those same exact times, a lot of other great studies have shown a lot of other benefits of outdoor and nature education. And so here we have, as environmental educators or advocates, we have some of the biggest things, and that is just the fact that positive outdoor nature experience lead to positive environmental attitudes and behaviors going forward. So in short, if someone has a great time in a natural setting, they're more likely to be someone who is going to donate money or enjoy nature or advocate for nature and natural areas moving forward in their lives. And that's not just young people, that can be adults as well. And a lot of great studies are continuing to come out in this aspect. And I think it's important to kind of back up and think, we can think about all these specific ways to learn and all these things, but just as simple as it is, just having a positive experience outside in nature is hugely impactful. And by nature, that is even a park, that is a school garden, that's an empty lot that isn't human centered, right? We often think it has to be deep into a forest somewhere. But no, it can be something as simple as just a park in the neighborhood or your school garden, which is great. So things that we have happen, again, they have these fantastic ability to have these positive attitudes. And there's going to be great research that comes in the future with that as well. But for us, we want to think about also the emotional benefits that can and have been measured, because where we're at is this is a trying emotional time. I think we've all read the newspaper articles and seen the studies. The pandemic, whether it's just the lockdowns, the lack of human contact, the COVID-19 itself, there have been a lot of mental health issues associated with this entire pandemic. And outdoor education can certainly be something that's with that. And here are a few just different studies, but again, not to belabor the individual studies themselves, but some of the ideas are, before there was ever a pandemic, there have been great studies that show positive emotional impacts of outdoor and environmental education. I mean, sometimes those are just psychological benefits, happiness, better sense of place, emotional well-being, things that have been shown. There are therapeutic uses. Some studies have shown how ADHD treatments are simply by having more nature and outdoor education-based learning. A great one, I think that would, this study by Wells and Evans, the third one down, I think is a really important one, and it needs more studies like it, but being around natural areas is a good buffer for stressful things. And how much more stressful can we have other than a worldwide pandemic? And so a buffer to that stress, alleviating stress just naturally, is having access to nature. And so thinking about how we can use the power of our outdoor ed and programs and areas for moving forward in these things. And again, just the joy that sometimes is measurable from students having these experiences, whether it's in a school garden, on a nature trail, wherever they might be.
Can I interrupt for a sec?
Yeah.
I put in the chat Park RX, and Park RX is a legitimate way for people actually to get a prescription from their doctor or their counselor, to get a prescription to actually go to a playground and exercise or connect with nature by going to a specific nature trail and everything. So I threw that out there. I attended a webinar through New England Public Health Training Center to learn about this, and I already know there's over 300 places listed in Massachusetts. There's 72 in Connecticut, and there's some that are listed in Maine, I know of. I would imagine there's places listed for New Hampshire as well. So check it out.
No matter where we're at, because we have lots of different backgrounds and lots of different places for outdoor environmental education. Again, it might be in a classroom with a garden access or a small nature trail available. It might be at the Harris Center where there are lots of trails and outdoor space. We have a farm and some nature space. All of those things are very different. But what we want to think about, I guess, moving forward is going to be, how do we need to think about emotional risk as well as physical risk? Because we're not all perceiving the world in the same ways. I think about this as an experiential educator that is more of an introvert myself. Often, if I go to workshops and do experiential education, it tends to cater more to an extrovert. And sometimes introverted or just more reserved people can feel a little left behind. And we want to be able to welcome everyone in these experiences. So outdoor education, it could very well feel like those who are willing to take a risk during a pandemic are those who are getting this opportunity, and we don't want to leave behind those who are feeling more or less comfortable, right? So in this aspect, I guess, sorry, now I'm a little off track. No matter where we're at, because we have lots of different backgrounds and lots of different places for outdoor environmental education. Again, it might be in a classroom with a garden access or a small nature trail available. It might be at the Harris Center where there are lots of trails and outdoor space. We have a farm and some nature space. All of those things are very different. But what we want to think about, I guess, moving forward is going to be, how do we need to think about emotional risk as well as physical risk, because we're not all perceiving the world in the same ways. I think about this as an experiential educator that is more of an introvert myself. Often, if I go to workshops and do experiential education, it tends to cater more to an extrovert. And sometimes introverted or just more reserved people can feel a little left behind. And we want to be able to welcome everyone in these experiences. So outdoor education, it could very well feel like those who are willing to take a risk during a pandemic are those who are getting this opportunity, and we don't want to leave behind those who are feeling more or less comfortable, right? So where I have here is conflict in the time of COVID, and I'm not thinking necessarily physical conflict, but conflicts of basically our goal interference. So this is where I'm going to ask everyone to be a part of this, and you can just unmute yourself and speak up. What might be some kind of goal conflicts that would come about in an outdoor education situation? As kind of an example, if we were just thinking recreation, a goal conflict there is you might have someone that is a hiker and you might have someone that is a mountain biker. Well, they're enjoying the same trails and some of the same natural experiences, but there are goal conflicts in that they're going to use the same spot in very different ways. That hiker might feel very uncomfortable with a mountain biker flying down a hill, and that mountain biker might feel very uncomfortable if the hiker is not prepared for them and doing something that could cause danger. So what could be some conflicts that we can think about moving forward for our participants in outdoor education in these now and the coming year or so? And again, feel free just to unmute and yell things out. I can hopefully.
My town recently had a survey done in reference to a public park, and it found that a low percentage of people went hiking, but when it came to them, being asked if they connect with nature, not many said they connect with nature. Meanwhile, at the same time, the survey found that people want more events there. So it looks like it'll be more of a venue than actually a public park. I found it a little bit disturbing to find out that, people can go hiking, and I've seen this myself. I can say, oh, I just saw a caterpillar, or I just saw a snake, but people will be so dismissive. They'll walk right by it. They'll walk by a great blue heron. They'll walk right by a woodpecker pecking in the trees. Like, they're in their own world. I don't know if it's, earbuds in the ears, their smartphone, there's a totally disconnect with nature, even though they're in nature. And I just don't know how to connect them to what's in front of them instead of being so disconnected with, just the task of I want to exercise instead of I want to connect with nature.
Yeah. It's always kind of that's certainly an area. And one of the things I'm hoping to do that might be an answer for those types of things, especially in non-led groups, is I'm hoping for the summer we're going to have kind of free access again. And for those that are comfortable with not with a presentation, they just want to be with their family group and self-guided, I was going to try and set up as many prompts as I can around our farm property so that they can be engaged still without having me there. So I always really liked an activity called Camouflaged Cardinals, where it has just had a wooden cutout of a female cardinal, a brown colored cardinal, and a male red colored cardinal. And I would put those into a tree somewhere with a prompt that says, can you find both the male and female cardinals? So yeah, just those types of prompts around that. Hopefully if someone's running or walking and they go, oh, that's interesting. They might not, but it's at least an opportunity.
Yeah, another thing.
So, just thinking about the conflict as far as COVID, when we have groups up, we require them to wear masks. But you know, when we're outside, I mean, Vermont still has a mask mandate, and so I can see there being conflict of people who are outside deciding they don't want to wear one versus those that are still, you know, needing that comfort or even meeting state restrictions of wearing a mask. I mean, I'm seeing that when I go to the local post office. You know, there's a sign on the door that says wear a mask. The lobby is extremely small, and yet the postmaster is allowing people to go in and out without a mask on. And as restrictions are lifted and as people have their vaccines, you know, I'm in New York State and we're still being told to wear masks. In Vermont, it's the same thing, but there are people that don't think that that is still a necessity. And I can see that definitely being a conflict, unfortunately, as we are opening up and we are bringing people together from outside groups.
For sure. Yeah. And it's, I think going back to this, I want to always kind of come back to that first prompt that I had was positive experiences in nature can lead to more advocacy and better outcomes, and negative experiences in nature can have the opposite. And so how can we have as many positive outcomes as we can? And when we have these conflicts, it's kind of hard. We don't want to pick and choose right and wrong right now. We just want to have as many positive experiences in nature because there is that emotional benefit. And so, yeah, masks are going to be certainly a thing moving forward. And how do we, I'm not going to pretend like I have any answer, but that is definitely a question we're going to have to be answering and asking.
One of the conflicts that I experience in my teaching is with the physical distancing and wanting to keep the space, but then you see that really exciting thing with your group. And there's a lot of enthusiasm to get close to it and to see it. And I want that for all of the kids, but then asking them to tone it down enough to be patient, to wait for their turn to get close so we can still have that space. So it's not necessarily a conflict that's negative. It's really a positive conflict in some ways, because we're thinking about what is our excitement, and then also how do we keep each other safe when there's something exciting. But that is a conflict that I experience.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a conflict between you, the educator or the moderator, and the excitable participants. Where, oh, it's a moment, but oh no, we got to share this great thing, but also how do we do that without potentially being unsafe about it? So totally, I mean, that is completely out of what outdoor education usually is, right? It is usually, oh, this is an awesome thing, everyone crowd around, which might not always be comfortable for everyone anyways, but it is something that, kind of moving forward.
Love the ability to go to all these webinars because I'm learning a lot and I'm earning certifications and I'm participating, in a network of sorts, meeting people from faraway places. So, I think there's a plus to COVID with all these opportunities for research and learning.
For sure, there has been some silver linings. Kind of another conflict that I was thinking of as well is, again, trying to, and really, I guess it's going to be keeping with that, conflicts as we move forward. As we keep going month to month to month, we're going to have all these. I mean, my assumption will be that we're going to have less regulations by state and more people being comfortable, but it's still going to take a lot of time. I think there's going to be that idea of like perceived risk versus actual risk as well. And this is always a thing I learned about, that we think about this as like ropes training, or if you did like adventure education or like climbing wall. Like the perceived risk is always pretty great, but you're in a harness and a rope, and so there's not actually a lot of actual risk. But I see this as like science is pretty firm now that surfaces are pretty low risk. This particular virus is not transmitted very much by touching things, but that doesn't mean people are comfortable with it. So still being able to kind of cater to everyone's comfort levels without it, it costs a lot more to keep things clean for individuals, time and all these things. But also, if you're not showing people that you're thinking about it, they might not be comfortable. So it's, again, that kind of perceived risk versus actual risk could be an issue with conflict as well moving forward. Now, I don't want to keep us past our time. I know it's getting close to 5. Did anyone else have any other conflicts that they could see that came up to mind?
Well, right now I'm seeing that you're focusing, I would say, more on the negative aspect of the conflict of COVID versus the positive benefits, where families are connecting more. I mean, I see more people in my neighborhood walking. I see more pets being adopted, which is an emotional what do you call it? An animal emotional support.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I just see a lot of positive to this downtime, if you will, where
Sure,
people
absolutely.
are staying home.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of our opportunity right now, is that we can, for me, I see outdoor education as being a giant positive in thinking about emotional well-being for our participants, right? We've already seen some of those studies where there's already naturally a place that relieves stress, helps with health and activity. People are more likely to be active if they're doing outdoor education, continuing that on their own. So kind of coming at the end, there are a lot of things that we need to keep in mind as far as keeping an eye on everybody, right? We're not all going to perceive, we all don't perceive the world in the same way. So we're not all going to be moving from pandemic to outdoor education in the same mindset. So just trying to keep these like possible conflicts in mind so that we can cater to everyone's needs the best, so that we can hopefully gain the most emotional benefit for everybody. Because again, that's what we want. We want to have more people interacting with nature and carrying that forward in their lives in whatever way that looks like. So thank you for all for jumping in. I know, yeah, go ahead, Christine.
Let's see.
There we go. One thing that we ran into last year, so we were deliberately keeping our groups small, reduced from maybe 15 in a group to maybe 10 in a group, was where, so we specify on our website when people are registering that they need to register for both for themselves and their children, and they wouldn't count themselves in their group. And we were running into conflicts, which we were able to work through, with some very diplomatically, but having groups that they had more people that they wanted to bring to a program than they were actually assigned for. So, there was some kind of fancy dancing diplomatically to bring that group down to the number that they had originally registered for, with having adults stand aside, and maybe having one adult with the group of kids rather than, grandma and grandpa and parents and aunts and uncles along with however many kids. So that's one thing that we noticed that we were having to deal with. And I can see that happening again as people are just, coming along for the ride. So that's one thing that we ran into.
For sure, yeah.
Good to have lots of people, not necessarily at this time of year.
Yeah, I know. It's counter to what we usually want, right? We want as many people as possible, and now it's like, well, maybe we want less than that.
Yeah.
I was going to leave, I guess, on so on that note, as far as developing a safe outdoor program, it's kind of what we talked about, taking those. I mean, everyone's got a different center, a different places available, so it's hard to have those specific plans, but it's kind of keeping in mind how we can use our space, think about all of our participants as best. But one thing I did want to leave on was one activity I like to do is kind of an icebreaker that might help with some of these ideas, which is basically like called comfort circles or a comfort equilibrium. And essentially it's just a question answer prompt where you have, with ropes or cones or some different area, you've got 3 different distinct zones that are your comfort zone, your challenge zone, and your stress or panic zone. And traditionally in maybe experiential or outdoor education, you want people to be challenging themselves. And so you can ask questions like, would you rather swim in a pond or, you know, swimming in a pond, does that make you, is that a comfortable thing? Is that a challenging thing, or is that a panic thing? And then people move themselves to those spots. And so still doing this prompt, but now we're thinking about maybe, you know, are you comfortable with a mask on standing 10 feet away from somebody outside? And then people can see where everyone is at the beginning of the adventure, and hopefully that will keep, and you know, this is something I've done with different prompts for all ages, and I think this is something that can help with that kind of just getting everyone on the same page, that we're not all on the same page. And usually we want to challenge ourselves, but maybe right now, maybe we all do want to be in our comfort zones instead, because public health isn't really a challenging thing, you know, in the same way as pushing ourselves to learn a little bit more. So that's an activity that I like, and I think would be a nice way to start an adventure, just to make sure that, again, people are reminded that we all don't perceive the world in the same way, and we don't think about things in the same way. Oop. But with that, I will stop my screen. And then I think we were gonna, I know we're getting kind of close to, you know, the end of our time, but I think we were gonna open it up to just any questions, but also I kind of wanted to have a prompt at the end of, like, you know, what, you know, and this might be just a leaving your own prompt as you leave, if you don't want questions at the end, but kind of like, you know, what things can we take from this? You know, we kind of mentioned, like, we've learned a lot of lessons with outdoor education. So what can we take from this type of, you know, this last year to be better in the future for our programs and outdoor learning, and being advocates for this type? Or just, you know, how do we see outdoor education changing in the future because of this? So I think we're going to open it up to questions.
Well, all I can say is, for me, people need to be more involved in, I would say, the political process, getting involved with, like, you know, a land trust or a conservation commission or park and recreation commission of their town, because that's where things happen. I mean, there's, you know, your job as well, you know, working for, like, say, an Audubon Center or whatever, but then when it comes to the town developing, you know, certain pieces of land, and you want to, say, have more green space, well, you got to stay on top of town politics. So I would think, you know, that's where people can become an environmental advocate. That's all I want to say on that.
Thanks, Deborah. Did anyone else have anything they'd like to share before we end today's webinar? And again, I will email out some of those, the things shared in the chat. I'll just put it all in a PDF for folks to take away. And if a question comes up, you can always email NHEE, and I can forward that along to whoever you have that question for as well. So thank you so much, Karen.
Yeah.
And Jim.
Well, thanks everybody for joining.
Yeah, thanks for joining and being interactive, everyone. It's, yeah, more than just probably listening to me talk, so makes it more fun.
Check out those web. I emailed you guys. Check out those websites for more webinar opportunities.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.